Welcome to Nav Chat, the show for the New Zealand orienteering and navigation sports community.
Hey Tom, welcome back for another month.
Hi Gene, how are you? How's your month been?
It's been really good actually. It started off basically terrible and my training routine has just got better and better since then. Have you ever had a back injury before?
I have.
Yeah, I've never experienced this before. I had a back muscle spasm, like just really low, kind of in the back of the pelvis. Oh my word, I have never experienced that before. And it came after I did a lot of stretching. I had some time off after nationals and I thought I'd knuckle down and do some stretching, lots of yoga. And I think I mobilized something that has not been mobilized for years. And my body had some readjusting and we've got through it now. But there was something that was so spasmy and would just cramp up if I put it in the wrong position. Oh, terrible.
Are you 30?
Yeah, bro. Shit.
Yeah, that's it. I don't think it's the yoga. I think it's the 30. I think that's what's probably done it. I don't know about you. As a near masters athlete now myself, I definitely feel the need for a warm up and definitely not as resilient to funny twists and falls as I used to be. But are you on the mend?
Yeah. I was pretty concerned because it was super painful. And my physio was not phased at all. And he's like, nah, this is usual. The level of pain, he said, doesn't really represent what's going on. There's no obvious damage. It's just a muscle that's very twitchy. And so, yeah, it subsided. And running was actually made it feel better. It would kind of like warm up and mobilize a bit better.
You got to get moving with back pain. That's how you make it better. I've had a similar experience. Yeah.
Okay.
Has that impacted your training? Because you're heading over to WOC.
Yeah, it did push things back a bit. I was planning to have 2 weeks of intentional rest after New Zealand champs, and that ended up being 3 weeks, which is not a bad thing overall. But I do feel like I'm playing catch up a bit with the training. It is a very short build that I've given myself, so just 7 weeks. And yeah, it's going well though. The body's happy enough now. So I'm training well, doing everything I can. A lot of hard runs happening at the moment, a lot of faster runs and sprint training. I
guess it's a sprint walk, so you're going to be wanting to focus on that sprint orienteering. And my back's getting sore just from talking about backs. So shall we quickly segue into talking to Malcolm? You caught up with him, very relevant with recent Sprint World Cup and upcoming Sprint Walk, and with Kiwis having the national sprint fresh in their mind. You had a talk with him about a variety of things, but focusing on knockout sprints and how they work.
Yeah, definitely the theme of the moment. So yeah, let's see what Malcolm has to say.
Hi, Malcolm.
Good evening, Jane.
Thanks for coming on Nav Chat. Tom and I were keen to hear more about knockout sprints, and I heard you are the resident expert at this stage. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I would say that. Hang on, let me just turn my sound up a wee bit. Yeah.
Have you been watching the races last night?
I watched until the men finished. I couldn't be bothered waiting for the 1 hour break between the first lot of women and the second lot of women. And I must admit, I'm not particularly happy with IOF's special rules where they seem to manipulate the rules to the benefit of the top end of the field. I just take it you noticed that the top 40 runners had a 1.5 minute start interval, while everyone else had a 1 minute start interval.
Yeah, okay. I didn't notice. I wasn't watching the live thing, just the GPS afterwards. So yeah, that's definitely a strange one.
No. Yeah, and then they had a 1 hour. The men went more or less continuously, but there was a 5 minute gap before the top 40. But for the women, they ran all the early starters. Then there was literally a 1 hour gap in the start list before the top 40 went off with a wider start interval.
So it's a bit of a 2-tiered start list.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's so disrespectful of the people. I was willing somebody from early on to win. Well, it's all for TV, of course.
Yeah. Cool. So can can you give a bit of background on where knockout sprint has come from and how long has this been in the pipeline? And what were some of the other alternatives that were proposed to knockout sprint before it was a thing?
I can't, I guess the first time I came across it was, I think it was 2015 at the World Champs in Sweden, where I went to the General Assembly as the ONZ delegate. And that was the point where they finally decided to split WOC into a forest version and into a sprint version. The rationale for it being, yes, money, that they felt they can sprint WOC in urban settings, they can make quite a bit of money out. They were hoping people would actually bid for hosting rights, I think. And that would then finance forest WOC, and it also solved the problem of, as the event has got bigger, it's become harder and harder for people to put on both forest and sprint at the same time. Once they decided that, of course, I think the feeling was that a sprint and a sprint relay on their own were not enough for a sprint WOC, so they wanted a third race to go in there. I can't remember, I must admit, if there were other alternatives, but it very rapidly came down to being a knockout sprint. And it was trialled at various training camps for a number of years with different formats. And I can't remember when it first came into an official race, but there have been several knockout sprints now in World Cup races where they've tested the various formats, and there's still a fair degree of flexibility in what you actually do. But clearly it's something that I think we saw on the horizon, and obviously, particularly in the last 2 years, with no international competition for others than the likes of Tim and Toby Scott, we needed to do something about making sure people are experienced in having, in what goes into a knockout sprint. So I think when you say I'm the local resident expert, it simply comes down to that I've been involved in organising what we've had. How much that qualifies me for, I'm not entirely sure.
So you mentioned that there is some variation in how a knockout sprint can be run. Let's start with the things that are always part of a knockout sprint. Like, what is the scaffold that a race organizer has to use?
The absolute basic is that there is a qualification race, and that in major competition, such as tomorrow night will be and WOC will be, qualification is in 3 heats, and only the top 12 in each heat qualify. And that is very strictly adhered to, in that you can only have 36 in the knockout rounds, so 3 heats of 12. And whereas in an individual sprint where you've got a qualification, if there's a tie for the last qualification place, both people go through. If there's a tie in the knockout sprint for the last qualification place, it's done purely on world ranking. So it's another reason why world ranking is actually quite important if you're going to be on that border. And I think it's probably true that from our point of view, the hardest aspect for the knockout sprint is going to be qualifying. And when you look at the kind of field they're going to have tomorrow night, with something like 120 men and 100 women, they're going to be in heats of 35 or 40. It's only the top 30% of the field is going to get through in any qualification race. And that's a big ask compared to WOC, where the field is reduced, because of course in World Cups you can have countries like Sweden, I haven't counted up, but they've probably got at least 6 men, if not 8 men, whereas at WOC they'll only have 3 or 4, and that applies to other countries. So In a World Cup, just qualifying is a big ask in a World Cup knockout sprint. But that's the basic. There's always going to be 36 qualifiers, men, 36 qualifiers, women.
And then what do they do
Once
with
you're
them? How do they
into-
split them up from there?
From there are two possible ways of splitting them up. They go into 6 quarterfinals of 6 people each. The one that I think has been used most is that there is an IOF formula, which is actually in their rules as to who goes into which quarterfinals. So, for example, the winner of qualification heat 1 will go into quarterfinal 3. The winner of qualification heat 2 will go into quarterfinal 1 or whatever. And it's done like that. The other option, which they actually used in the Danish test races a couple of weeks ago, is that it's called athlete's choice. And you get people are listed in order of where they're qualified. So you'll be the first 3 people will be the winners of the qualification heats. And in that order, they are allowed to choose which quarterfinal they go into. And it's an open process. So you can actually see and hear what other people are choosing. So, of course, tactics comes into this. Should I be avoiding Tim Robertson in my quarterfinal? Do I want to run with Tim Robertson in my quarterfinal because he will give me a tow and I'll qualify for the next round, and so on? So it becomes it's one of the few areas, one of the areas where, yes, tactics really does come into play. And having seen that the Danes used it at their test races, it would not surprise me if they use it at WOC as well. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't actually seen that athlete's choice before. From that point onwards, is it all systematic, or once people have got into the qualifier?
From that point on, it's all systematic. There are each quarterfinal, the top 3 qualify. So that gives us 18 in the semi-finals, which gives us 3 semi-finals of 6, and the top 2 in each semi-final go into the final. So it's, once you're into that quarterfinal stage and the quarterfinals have been sorted, yes, it's all laid down as to who goes where. And the other aspect, of course, is whether there's any splitting of the field, because, of course, the knockout rounds are straight 6-person mass starts. And there appear to be 3 options for what can happen. The simplest one is actually putting a pivot control in and having some short loops. Is worth remembering that the knockout rounds are meant to be an 8-minute winning time or thereabouts. So you haven't got a lot of flexibility in what you can put in terms of length of course. But if you have pivots and 3 little loops, then every individual can go around those loops in a different order, and there will be complete splitting over the course of the event. Sometimes there are only 2 loops, in which case a couple of people are going to be running together all the time. And there are various ways of actually doing the loops as well. You can actually put a few common controls in with splits between each of the common controls, so you don't actually have a pivot control, but you have 2 slightly different loops with a lot of common controls. The other way, which we have practiced and which has been used at World Cups, is the map choice option, where, for example, between, say, let's take an argument, say control 3 and control 6, there might be 3 options for 4 and 5. And each athlete in each quarterfinal or each round of quarterfinal or semi-final or whatever, each competitor simultaneously gets 20 seconds to choose which of those options they wish to run. And they only see the start control marked as a triangle, the finish control marked as a circle without a number on, so I don't know where it comes in the course.
Yeah, so by start
And
control,
the
you mean
options in between.
the control that's at the start of the
The
splitting
control that's at the
option.
start of
Yep.
the split, yes. Yeah. And they have 20 seconds to choose what they want. And nobody knows what anyone else in their heat has actually chosen. So hopefully, if it's well set, which of course is quite a big challenge, you will end up with a split of people going in different directions when they get to the start of the split. That, to a certain extent, I think, is depending on what nation is planning it or running the event, is starting to fall out of favour, I think. I noticed in the knockout sprint in the Danish test races, they did not use map choice. And again, if you read the bulletins for this year's World Championships, they don't mention it. Whereas in the bulletin for tomorrow night at the World Cup, it is mentioned as a possibility. And of course, the third possibility is that it's a straight race and there is absolutely no splitting at all. But the course is planned, hopefully, to have sufficient route choice that people will actually split up through choosing different routes. That, of course, depends upon people having the confidence to choose a different route to the people they're running with. And it brings in the tactics. Do I hang with the crowd? Do I make my own choice? Or so on. And I think all the races at the Danish test races were actually straight races. I don't think they used any splitting at all. And if you look at the bulletin for the World Championships, where they have already listed how many controls there are going to be in each heat, there are only 8 to 10 controls, which means there's not a lot of scope for actually even putting in a pivot control in some loops.
You would expect shorter
they
legs
well have
surrounding
straight
a pivot.
races. They've either got to be very short legs around the pivot, or they've got to be a few long legs with significant route choice.
Yeah,
I think we saw in the Danish test races, they had a lot of artificial barriers set up as well to create the route choice. So I suspect that's going to be very much a model for what we will expect at the World Champs.
Do you get a sense that they're been moving away from the map choice because it's not an effective splitting method, or because it's very confusing for the TV coverage, which is kind of the sense I've got watching the TV coverage? If you're kind of new to orienteering, it's like, well, there's another thing going on. Or is it actually just that there's a lot of extra work to do because you have to have all those cubicles set up at the start to separate the runners, and they all have to have their own person watching that they stop looking at the map at the right time when they're doing the 20 seconds before they choose?
Possibly a combination of all of those things, Gene. I mean, I know ILF are very keen on making the TV coverage as streamlined as they possibly can and as easy for viewers to understand. So it would not surprise me if that plays a role in it. But I think also there's possibly a feeling amongst some people that it's, if you like, not real orienteering, having this sort of artificial splitting where people don't actually run the same course because they choose different options. But it's probably quite possibly a combination of all of those things. And it is, I mean, having done it, it's very difficult to actually plan something that is difficult to choose from. You don't want one option to clearly be a bad one, just as much as you don't want one option to be quite clearly the best option. And how easily you can do that, of course, depends upon the map that you're using. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be I'll be very interested to see what happens tomorrow night. I really will.
Yeah, as a spectator of a lot of these races, how have you enjoyed seeing knockout sprints rolled out both domestically and internationally over the past 2 years?
I think watching it is great fun. It really is. I mean, the one in Blenheim after the ONZ Champs this year, I was very gratified at the number of people who turned up to watch, and they obviously thoroughly enjoyed it as well. Particularly the final I'm talking about really here, but also when we ran the one in New Plymouth in 2020, where we had a lot of people watching and even had it up on the screen with live tracking as well. It's different, but it's exciting because you are actually seeing head-to-head racing, which we don't usually see.
Yeah, I agree. I actually didn't expect it would be something that I'm that into. It's extra short and extra sprinty. And I actually, maybe I prefer them more than normal sprints. It was super fun doing the whole day of head-to-head racing. I think the head-to-head bit is super fun.
Physically, it's very challenging for an athlete as well. One thing I did notice in the Danish test races, and it also seems to be on the timetable for tomorrow night, is that rather than having the qualification and the knockout rounds spread throughout the day, the qualification seems to be relatively early in the morning. Then there's quite a long gap, and then the knockout rounds seem to go bang, bang, bang with very little gap in between them. So all three knockout rounds take place in a space of about 2.5 hours for the men and the women, which is, again, presents a different physical challenge. It's going to be very much like doing intervals, intense intervals.
Yeah, well, this is exciting to see something new actually get traction. And yeah, I'm looking forward to racing more of these in the future. So thanks for bringing us up to speed as much as anyone could bring us up to speed at the moment. And we all look forward to seeing what happens tonight with World Cup and other races that are coming up, both domestically and overseas. So thanks, Malcolm.
Yes, no, welcome, Jane. You're welcome.
Have you done a knockout sprint yet, Tom?
No, I have not. I've been pretty. I've missed all of the sort of nationals and other event add-ons where they've had them in the last couple of years. They definitely strikes me, especially hearing Malcolm kind of talk through it and all the various rules and slight variations that they're still trying. It definitely sounds like a younger sport that we're still trying to figure out the optimal way to run it. So no, I haven't done one. I'm pretty keen to give it a try. I think I would be probably blown out of the water by some of our younger contemporaries at the moment. How about yourself? What's your experience been?
Yeah, I've done 2 knockout sprints now and really enjoyed both of them. I was not so sure that I would find it interesting, but I did find it really fun, actually. And I found that you do push a bit harder, and that pushes against your ability to navigate. And so the navigation was actually a little bit harder because of the context. In theory, the navigation is not hard, but when you're really pushing and jostling shoulder to shoulder with other competitors, then yeah, it's something a bit different. So I think it is quite complementary, and I'm really glad that they went for a knockout sprint than urban middle distance kind of style, which I don't think really brings anything new to the table.
No, I agree with you there. I definitely agree. It's high speed. It pushes the speed higher, doesn't it? Now, we don't have a huge amount of knockout sprints in New Zealand, but I think there are some techniques that you can train when you're thinking about sprint orienteering to help to not just enhance your knockout sprint running, but to enhance your more traditional sprint orienteering racing. You actually have the Nationals sprint course to bring up, and we're going to use that to talk about a couple of key things which you can train in sprint orienteering. So first up, the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to discuss an exercise you can do to work on speed differential in sprint orienteering. Now, in Europe, probably more so in New Zealand, we see courses where there'll be an area of forest as well as an area of buildings, requiring you to adopt different techniques in different parts of the course. We saw that a little bit at Nationals this year down in Nelson, where the sprint had a few controls initially in a forested area before moving into more complicated buildings. Trying to replicate that in training is a great idea. It's also really useful around New Zealand because lots of parks and urban maps in New Zealand include a little bit of both. It doesn't need to be an amazing bit of forest. In fact, it's almost better if it's just a plain bit of junk bush, really. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to set up a sprint interval, so maybe 4 to 6 or 7 controls, maybe 3 to 4 minutes worth, where you have a few in the forested area and a few out in the buildings, trying to really encourage and stress that whole different approach to techniques that you need and the different types of terrain and different speeds you should adopt. The other great thing with this is you can run the course in opposite directions to get better yield from the time spent making the map up, but also to stress out that fast to slow or slow to fast. Have you done something like this in the past, Jen?
I've done a lot of races that have focused on this, that have had this element in the past, especially in Europe. A lot of the areas that are raced in sprints in Sweden, for example, have a lot of little forested patches mixed in with their urban areas. And so you'd see controls that it might be like a building route choice, but the control placement is actually, on a cliff in a little patch of forest just on the other side. And switching between those two mindsets is actually a challenge that comes up quite a lot in European sprints, and maybe something we haven't focused on quite so much. We've done some full forest sprints in New Zealand, and we've done a lot of campus sprints, but this was really interesting that we had at Nationals a kind of a non-urban start to an urban sprint. And just going around this map a bit more, if you're doing a sprint training, you only have to have like 2 controls in this little forested area down here, just to change that mental model and how to navigate. Things become much more left, right, and a bit more continuous. How high do I have to be on the slope? And just putting 2 controls in that area, I think it is surprisingly challenging. It looks trivial on paper, but when you come to execute, you find that your brain isn't as in tune, because you don't have that rhythm of practicing that different, more like continuous style of orienteering, where you can be too high, too far, too far left, too far up, too far down. In sprint orienteering, you're just like, you're correct or you're like in the wrong building. And it's,
That's it. You can also bring in, it also forces you to bring in some of your other orienteering techniques around compass use and that sort of thing as well. And trying to be mentally prepared that it's a group of skills you might need to utilize in a sprint event. You might need to, say for instance, on this course we've got here, where there's a couple of controls on the fringes of the forest, they could quite easily put a few extra controls further up in the forest for a slightly longer period of navigation, where you're having to use contours and compass before then thrusting you back into the buildings. It's just about having practiced adopting that different mental model you're talking about there.
Yep.
So that's one exercise that would be that you could use to stress some sprint orienteering techniques. We talked about that being in the format of sprint intervals. Now, another useful technique to utilize with sprint intervals is trying to force yourself into different route choices. This is a great pairs exercise. And again, it's one where you can run a course forwards and then return to the start and run it a second time. Essentially, what you do is you have a left person and a right person, and ideally a course that's set with lots of route choice options. If you're the left person, after you punch the control, you must exit left and you must take a route that is to the left of the red line. And conversely, the person to the right must go right. The point being is it's looking for you to look wide and to have that little extra incentive of someone running with you, so you don't like default to running with another person. It gets you ready for the occurrence where you might be in a knockout sprint. You might need to be looking to see how you can escape from another runner. Also how you can just look for more options in sprint terrain. So I reckon your 6 to 7, you've just drawn a couple of legs on for us. I reckon your 6 to 7 is left. So that one they'd have to go round the building to the right. But for those who can see the video, the red would be right options, the blue would be left options. You run the course together, see who gets to the finish, and then little recovery after that sprint interval, and then flip it round and do the opposite. And then you can, in your warm down, you can discuss routes you took and pros and cons.
Yeah, and that's especially important. If you are to choose a better route choice next time, you have to get the feedback from the previous route choice that you've just done. So comparing notes and splits after a training session is essential. You might have a good feeling about the route choices you took, but were they actually faster? To find you had a good feeling about a route choice and then the person who went the other direction was 4 seconds faster is really important for calibrating your feeling of which kind of route choices are actually faster. You've got to practice knowing what the correct answer is. It's like flashcards in some sort of learning exercise. You can't just like keep trying different answers. You have to know what the answer is to know if you're doing it correct or not.
You don't need SI for this either. You can just use splits on your watch. And then after the training session, while you're taking some food on board or recovering afterwards, you can whip up your splits and compare notes and see what worked. I guess finally, the last thing you can do with either of these sprint interval techniques we've talked about is you can draw some extra barriers onto your map. We saw at nationals up at Long Bay College and also internationally that barriers are used increasingly to add complexity to sprint orienteering areas. You don't have to go to the trouble of putting these out, but drawing on some impassable fences can be one way to make what is a area that's either really familiar to you or potentially quite straightforward. You can make it a bit more complicated. Now, it's probably more of an advanced level technique because you've got to self-police that while you're out there, especially if you're not putting the barriers out. But if you're not putting controls out anyway, it's all about maintaining map contact anyway. So if you want to make something more complicated, you can try that.
Yep, I think that's a great idea. And it allows you to use an area you're familiar with in a new way, which can be really important if you have limited maps.
Cool. So just in terms of just recapping what we've talked about, so we've honed in on sprint intervals as a potential training technique. Really easy exercise to run on an urban map. We've given 3 possible exercises. The first being trying to set legs that include forest or bush areas, followed by a part of this interval moving into buildings to stress out your kind of speed and technique adaptation. We've talked about left and right intervals, so pairing up, trying route choices that are either way. And then we've talked about using barriers as a way to make familiar areas more interesting or more challenging. Any other points for you on that, Gene?
No, I think they're great. I think with those that combination of techniques, you can keep yourself pretty satisfied for a year.
All right, we've got a ton of racing to discuss this month and other sort of high performance orienteering news. So should we just get cracking? First thing we've got up is a selection announcement for another team to travel, a return of New Zealanders heading across to Europe.
Yeah, that's right. We're also sending a World University team this year. So congrats to Anna Wright, Amber Riddle, Jessica Sewell, Heidi Stolberger, Nathan Borton, Ronan Lee, Etienne Shadbolt, Dougal Shepherd, Scott Smith, and Liam Stolberger. They'll be heading over to Switzerland this year, and Kieran Woods is managing that team. So that will be the first big overseas experience for a number of these athletes. And World Universities is a really tough competition. There will be some very good athletes there at the top. So if we get some good results there, then they will be worthy of some recognition. I personally found World University champs to be quite formative for myself. It was a step up from JWOC and helped bridge me into the kind of senior elite world champs and World Cup level. So yeah, it's really important and will be just a super fun experience as well for everyone going over there to hang out with different teams and people who are in a similar position to you, who have been living on the other side of the world all these years.
The Swiss know how to put on a good championship orienteering event as well. So great country to be going to, I think. I don't know too much about the terrain there, but I mean, Swiss they've got plenty of good terrains. My personal experiences there have all been lots of variable vegetation and quite gully spur with some like quite complicated tracks and that sort of thing. But they also have alpine areas and things like that too.
Yeah, this one's pretty much in the middle. It's mainly continental, but there's some slightly more detailed contours in some places. So on paper, it doesn't look that hard, but I think they'll find with the vegetation changing, getting the optimal route choice and the safest lines is actually a challenge that they will be grappling with coming from some different style of navigation in most of New Zealand's terrains.
Yeah. Well, sprint focus, I think, comes in for a lot of the rest of the stuff, and you've got something here about underpasses.
Yeah, so this was a question comment that was posted after some races in Denmark. I believe these were of an area that has the new underpass symbols. So maybe this enlargement is actually clearer just to get our heads around these new symbols. So you can see the white and beige stripe. So that shows that on the main level, it's beige, so paving, but the white stripe shows that there is a second level below that. And the triangles show where you can enter into the lower level. So often you just see like two triangles at the start of a tunnel because it's like a narrow entranceway to a longer passage. Whereas this way, it's a bridge walkway. So there's actually a lot of triangles because it's you just walk under the dirt, under the grass, under the bridge. So it's kind of a different way to show a bridge. But what's been marked here in orange, which I think is really helpful, is that in theory, looking at the map, you can pass under the bridge through under the triangles and under the stripe, and then kind of onto the bridge. So so that section in B, and also in the A in red, A and B in red there, that's a mistake. That should be an impassable wall there, because I don't think that
yes, that makes sense, because otherwise how would that even work? That's like, it would mean that it's like sloping this way, so you can run up here but still go underneath here. Okay, so that is an error, is it?
Yeah, I think basically it was a mapping error, and there are a lot of comments on, well, we've got these new things to grapple with, and there's a few more dimensions you have to think about in your head when you're putting these areas together. And so mappers do have to be quite careful. And if we go back to the initial route choice, I'll draw on for those watching. So
route choice is to go around and under, or to go up onto the bridge and then down and loop around and underneath. Yeah,
so I think this is one route is like all the way around to 2, and I think the other route that they had,
I didn't even see that. Oh my god!
The other route that they had in mind, I think, is more like that, but because of the kind of misinterpretation of the map, you can you could go like straight on the boardwalk, and in theory, just like jump straight off there and then pop under.
Yeah, I think there's also probably faster, 2 exits which you could do faster, but not legit. Oh my gosh. Okay, so something to definitely stay.
Oh, sorry, we're going to 2. Yeah, sorry.
Something to stay aware of.
Yeah, something to be aware of, and I think there'll be some people who are looking at this and they're like, "Oh, I don't even understand the striped symbol, and I haven't got my head around the triangles because Jean's explanation was too brief." And we all have to go through that point when new symbols get introduced, and these are not just like a new color. This is a new feature in the terrain that previously was not able to be used, and now it's shown on the map and can be used for navigation if it's done fairly. So I think we're all going to go through this process of getting our heads wrapped around these new mapping symbols, so that we don't have to think so much about them. We just see the symbol and then we're like, "Yep, I know what it means. I know how to treat it." But we're in this kind of grey area at the moment. It'll
become intuitive in time, but it's not quite there yet, and we're still trying to get the mapping nailed. Okay, good example though. Very good example. That's great to see. Tio Mila, one of the big spring relays. I know we had Tim running. Kate Morrison, I guess, was she running? I'm not sure. But it sounds like you've caught up with someone from Okalana.
Yeah, that's right. I caught up with Oscar, who was Oscar Svetstorhoff, is one of the younger runners in the Okalana team. And I did a podcast with him talking about the race and how they set up the team and the preparations they did. And so that was great because the New Zealanders have some connections with Linne in Uppsala. Where we've stayed there a number of times before. And so it was great to see that these people who some of us have raced against for many years get to the top.
Nice. Yeah, it would be very interesting. Definitely worth a listen.
Yeah, and there's also some GPS tracking that we go through. We go through Oscar's race. So I definitely recommend checking out the video if you want to get a feel for some of this Swedish terrain and how to tackle it at nighttime as well. And it was really interesting to hear the tips from Oscar and how safe these guys are playing it at nighttime, especially when you have a team of 10. There's so much to lose in some of these relays that the name of the game is just don't lose the race on this control. And then the next control, don't lose the race again. So,
and there's the other thing as well, which we maybe don't appreciate, I didn't really appreciate until I went and ran Euclid, was just how important these are to the clubs. These relays are a pretty big deal, and when you've got you've got 20 elite men in your orienteering club, running in the first team at Euclid or Tio Mila is a really big deal. And some really, really good athletes are not even making those teams. So big achievement to win it.
Cool. And on to all the sprint orienteering that's been happening over the past month. So Tim obviously lives in Europe, so he's always hanging out over there. But now Penelope Salmon is over there for some time, and she's tackling a lot of races. We did an interview with her a few months back, and so she's in good shape. And she had some really good races in the WOC test races. So the WOC test races are basically like the WOC trials, but many countries will do their trials at these WOC test races, and they're held kind of near or in a similar terrain to the actual WOC races. So it's really specific. And because many countries and all the top countries send their athletes there for the trials, it actually creates a very strong field. So it's almost like a pre-season kind of training, like a pre-season meet, something that you might have in athletics.
We had Joe Lynch there as well. Is that right?
Joe Lynch just hit over a little bit later.
Okay, so he wasn't. He was just there for that World Cup that's just been on. Okay, so test races in Denmark. Have we got any tracking from the sprint?
We do some tracking. So Tim won the sprint, so he was obviously in great form earlier in the month. Also,
14 seconds, massive.
Yeah, that's a big lead, especially over Kasper Fosse. So here's a look at the map. It's fairly typical town sprint kind of thing. This is with everyone synchronized. So obviously it's an individual sprint, but everyone's synchronized from the start. Lots of street running, actually. The control sites, the control placement is not super tricky. There's, I think, a lot of running, but some quite big route choices that could take a long time to plan. These kind of sprints, you spend a lot of time planning.
Hasn't Tim just run some insane 14:01 5K or something?
Yeah, he did 14:01 5-kilometer race, and you would expect him to do really well if the course is technical or if the course is flat and fast at this point.
He's kind of got rid of it. He doesn't have a lot of weaknesses in sprint anymore, does he?
No.
So impressive.
Yeah, very impressive and good result from him. Pretty flawless execution of a race like this. So that was pretty cool. And we also had knockout sprints at the test races also. Tim was fourth in the final. So just getting to the final in a knockout sprint just means no mistakes the whole way through the day.
Malcolm was saying before, he's saying that qualification and especially these World Cup events in such large fields, it's such an achievement to even make that the knockout phase.
Yep, that's right. So Tim finishing fourth is really good. And I think Penelope finishing fifth in her second big race overseas is pretty outstanding, actually.
Yeah.
So she has this leg speed. Yeah, really impressed with this. Let's take a look at her GPS. This is the map of the knockout sprint final.
It's nice to see Auckland Orienteers listed there as clubs. You've got some big name overseas clubs and then the powerhouse Auckland Orienteers.
That's right. It's very cool. And I mean, she's racing against names that we've followed for seasons who have been at the top, and she's right up there in terms of speed. Again, this course has a lot of road running, and the control placement isn't super tricky, but there's a lot of investment that has to be done in the planning of some of these legs, because you do not want to pick the wrong route choice. GPS bouncing around on the buildings quite a lot here. But yeah, it looks like there was some very fast racing, and to finish fifth is fantastic for her.
Yeah. What's it? 8:26 for 2.2 Ks.
Yeah, so these are short and fast races, and so like that training we were talking about earlier, if you are thinking about doing knockout sprint seriously, then there's no reason to do long sprint trainings. They should all be hectically fast and short.
Definitely, yeah. Now on to the World Cup. Now there's been pretty good coverage of this, I must admit. Like, yes, IOF has they've got some quirks with their online coverage, but it's been cool to see, not just like ONZ has some good articles about it. There's been a bit of social media coverage of it. And obviously we got Tim grabbing another couple of World Cup medals, really.
Yeah, so Tim got silver in the World Cup sprint. That was the first race at this World Cup. And so that was outstanding. He was beaten by Casper Fossa, who was second to him in those test races. And yeah, we'll take a quick look at what it looks like. I mean, yeah, running that close to 14-minute 5K. You can see him just around the course, just kind of going fast the whole time. He doesn't even look like he's going that fast a lot of the time, but he's so consistent and so smooth. And navigation, I mean, it's just pretty flawless. He's even better on more technical areas. So this must be relatively simple. I remember his first big races he did at a senior level, where he got a sixth in a World Cup. That they were really technical races that he's really good at. And now he can just kind of do really well at both the faster ones and the more technical ones. So really impressive from Tim. This is the race. So again, like the terrain's not super technical, but it's important that you don't miss any gaps. So you do have to invest a lot of time in planning ahead and make sure that you don't have some mistake route choice. Like you think it's a good way. So some of the gaps that are really important to see, things like
spaces in the fences. Yeah, I think the other thing to note on this is this map is very typical Scandinavian sprint terrain, with these many smaller buildings with gardens and streets. And I think that's kind of reflected in the results a little. There were a lot of Scandinavian runners near the front. Maybe the Swiss didn't quite go as good as they have in other terrains. But Tim, I mean, he's, like you say, he's got good skills across multiple terrain types, really.
Yeah.
You have to say him and Yannick Michels from Belgium would be two of the non-core orienteering nation runners who are consistently a risk of or a threat for these races.
Yeah, and you can see how wide people are going on a lot of these routes. There is a lot of impassable lines in the terrain, so this looks fun. I think that the terrain is fun enough, and when you're going fast, it's really interesting, and you have to plan ahead a bit. But the next map I think is actually really fun, the one they used for the knockout sprint. So yeah, Tim again, really showing us that he's super consistent, as I think he is ranked number 1 in the world now at sprint orienteering after these two seconds.
Pretty hard to beat that. World Cup as well.
Yeah, of course.
Went to a sprint World Cup as well, which is pretty big.
So yeah, that's very impressive, and we're really excited about that. Let's take a look at the knockout sprint though, because I think this map's actually is a lot more densely packed, and there's a lot going on actually. So this is really cool that they haven't just made this a fast, flat out spectator race. Like it is very twisty and turny, a lot of impassable lines and a lot of gaps in those lines as well. So what you can see here is the A, B, and C map choice options. So for those that listen to what Malcolm was saying, you might have realized that there's this setup at the start where the competitors get to choose a couple of controls that could be different to some of the choices that the other starters have chosen. So they will get, you get lined up in these little booths, and you get 20 seconds before the start to choose which option you're going to take. So they'll get given a little piece of paper that will have on it option A. So it'll be a control there. They don't know it's number 2, but there'll be a control, then a control, and then the controls, and they'll have 3 different maps, and they get to choose which one. And this is the little starting gates, so they don't know what other people have chosen. And it's quite a lot to set up, but they did do it, and I think it was pretty effective, actually. And some other points about some of these photos are pretty cool, just how packed everyone is together. It's super close out there in the terrain. So this is quite different to sprint, actually. There are some elements that are proving to be different. There's just a lot going on, a lot of other distractions. And this is Tim coming through the run through, the spectator leading the pack, and you can see how close everyone is, breathing down his neck.
It's pretty cool, Abe. And you see a Swiss runner, a couple of Swedes, and a New Zealander.
Mm-hmm.
Thanking it. It's good.
Yeah. So that was actually the semi-final where they used the map choice. The final was a straight final.
No forking.
No forking. Yeah. But the route choices were, I thought, decent enough. But it's really interesting how everyone sticks together. It's very hard to get people to split up because of the tactics that unfold in these races. But here's one example of when someone did split up, actually. And it just shows you that following is not always the best option. And we're following here Megan Carter-Davis from the UK in the pink there. So getting 3 and then 4, and then the whole pack's going one way. It looked like she might have punched it first or been close to the front, and everyone else has gone a different way. And
everyone else has followed Tove.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting that's happened. And now what you've got is a situation where you're either going to be up, or there's now a chance that you could be up, or a chance that you could be down. And in this case, Megan Carter-Davis managed to pull a few seconds on everyone and finished up second, only getting overtaken by Tove Alexanderson towards the end. So that decision there was just being top 6 to silver medal, or it was in that decision there to go different to everyone else. And it's really hard. Much more fiddly route choice, isn't she? That's in the foresight to be able to spot that in this situation and have the foresight to be like, no, I'm strong on my convictions. I'm going to go a different way from these other runners. It's pretty bold, really. Yeah, it was rewarded big time. This leg 6 to 7 also, everyone's run around. Carter-Davis punching first. Did everyone follow her, or had they already decided to go around? I'm not sure. The men had the same leg also, 7 to 6, and it was quicker to go through the middle here. I think around 3 or 4 seconds quicker, and 3 of them did, including Tim, went through the middle and then got the gap. You know, that they were the top 3 at this point. With the other 3 who went around were definitely lost a bit of time. So it's not just a running race. It's a lot of running race, but there are these critical moments when stealing 3 seconds can take you from 5th to 2nd.
And I guess the other way to look at it as well is like, if you put like non-elite orienteers on this, they would have a wide range of route choices, just the same as if you put a non-elite orienteers on a WOC course. And then we do see at WOC in the forest that there is a lot of coalescence of route choices onto the optimal legs. It's because at this level, people are so good, and they're so they know and they're prepared so well that it seems like they're all going the same way and just following, but actually there's a lot more going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, I think that is right. And often they're simplifying with the same themes. Like they know the terrain and they're like, it's too twisty through the gardens generally. So generally I'm going to bias out to the roads. And if everyone applies that same rule, then you seem to see everyone taking similar route choices. One other thing that's notable about these sprint races, and Malcolm, as a manager of the team, was I think in on the communications and noticed that the event organizers who were supposed to use a certain type of tape, there's a certain IOF tape that they were using to block off all of these, all of the roads that the competitors are not allowed to use. There's something we didn't cover earlier, how many areas there are that are blocked off out of bounds, which make these route choices quite spicy actually, because at first glance, there seems to be an easier way that's not possible because of the blocked off areas. And they ran out of tape because there was so many out of bounds areas on this map and the maps that they used earlier in the day and for the other races as well. As we already saw on the sprint and in the sprint relays. So there's a lot of artificial barriers being put up for these races now.
And then there was the sprint relay. Is that our last race of the World Cup?
That's right.
Went down last night.
Yep, more of a simple area, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know. As much as we've said that the individual race was typical Swedish terrain, the knockout was that really interesting kind of centrum area. I thought this, I don't know, for a relay, I was a little bit underwhelmed with this course. Obviously, I haven't run it, but there's a lot of quite long legs with a couple of route choices in them. I don't know. I wasn't super inspired by this.
Yeah, it's certainly not as tightly packed as the other areas.
It's almost like they said the arena's going to be here. We want to make sure we cross the river. We've got to do all these transit leagues back and forth. I wonder if they'd stuck closer to the arena, they could have had a more interesting around that cathedral, or if they had really wanted to be down on the other side in the park, if they could have moved the arena somewhere else. I mean, I don't know. They've it's not terrible, but I just think compared to the others, it's not quite as interesting.
Yep, definitely high speed. Definitely helps those who are the fastest runners, and a lot of artificial barriers again. So there is planning to do.
And down by control 8 as well, you can see utilization of the triangles and the underpass symbol.
Yeah, here we go. Yep, in a race setting, the triangles indicating where you can enter and exit the lower level.
Yeah. Definitely go through these maps if you're interested, if you're wanting to make sure you tune up on those symbols. There was a wee bit of it in action at these World Cups, and no doubt there'll be more at WOC in Denmark as well.
Yeah, that's right. Moving on to events we've got coming up. Once we're satisfied watching the World Cup action, Queen's birthday is coming
just
up.
Just a bit of motivation
really
to get up for Queen's birthday. Yeah.
The fields are looking good. Are you going to make it, Tom?
No, sadly. Just Martariki maybe for me. It's just a tricky time of year with not much leave available at work. So sadly not this year.
Cool.
You sound like you are though, and it's also Wellington, so not too far from home.
Yep, it's not too far for me. And I'm really looking forward to getting some racing in, actually, just to break up the training that I've been doing. I've had 4 really good weeks in a row now, and really looking forward to getting some racing in. I think I'm the monotony that I've done over the past 4 weeks in my routine has been really rewarding as far as improvements in fitness. But I think I need something to break it up a bit. So I'm looking forward to slamming some races this weekend. We have a sprint as well on Saturday morning, 2 middle distances and a long distance as well, about 15 kilometers on this area. So
4 minute Ks though, right? 4 minute Ks.
It's so soft. This area is so soft. It's a giant sponge.
Oh, I think this is I love Woodhill. Woodhill's my orienteering home terrain, but I think these Manawatu sand dune maps, just with the linear nature of the sand dunes, it's just such a you can be on a leg and feel like you're in control and following a nice handrail, and then it just stings you when you like don't quite get your direction right, or you don't quite read the high points when you go into the more complicated areas. I think this is just really, really fun terrain to orienteer in.
Yep, I agree. And I think the hills are punchier as well, actually very steep.
True, yeah.
On the side.
You've got those 3-4 contour hills, yeah.
Yeah, they come out of nowhere, and you get pushed around a bit by trying to avoid the steep pinches, whereas Woodhill's a little bit more flowy, I think. So, yeah, this is cool. I'm really looking forward to it. This is an older map of the larger area of forest. I haven't been this far north I remember, but we've definitely done orienteering close to the kind of Scott's Ferry car park down here on the road or somewhere south. Yeah.
Do you know if there's any coastal strip?
No, it kind of, the forest just like gets super dense. Like the trees are just really stunted as you come towards the beach.
and as well as like radiata pine that are just like gnarled and stunted. Yeah,
and so transitioning from the pine forest to the beach is not really something that's
you can't run 4-minute Ks in that stuff anyway. So
no, it's just a wall of dense. So yeah, that's not going to happen. And the dunes, I don't think they're very wide. So the open dunes are not very wide. So I think they'll stay in the wide areas. Yes. And with 15 kilometers, I expect it's just going to be straight, white, flat running, balls to the wall the whole time.
We can report back. You can report back next month, and we can hone in on some sort of technique that you found useful. Should we wrap things up? Because we've got we're heading to Europe soon. It's a sprint walk, and you haven't been to a dedicated sprint walk before. What is something you're doing differently in your preparation to prepare for a sprint week rather than having the forest to think about?
Yeah, so I am doing sprint orienteering training exclusively. Queen's birthday is going to be a bit of a break to that, but it's certainly different. Normally,
earth-shattering, innovative approach.
Yeah.
How about any specific training sessions that you've put in for sprint training over winter? Is there anything in particular you've incorporated this time around?
Running wise, yeah, I'm doing a lot of shorter intervals, 200-meter sprints, 400-meter sprints, and they're sessions that I have done in the past. But I've done a lot of hill sprints in the past to build power. But what I'm trying to do now, because the races in Denmark are flat, is I'm doing them all flat, which is actually a little bit different to what I've done in the past. Anyone who's ever done athletics, this is like a staple diet for them. But I haven't done these faster interval sessions, these short, sharp intervals with lots of shorter intervals. So doing more of that stuff, and this hurts. Yeah, they're gnarly sessions, but my body's handling it quite well. You have a good feeling when you do a hard session, and as soon as you start warming down, your heart rate's back to a low level, and you start bouncing along quite nicely. So nice. I think I'm taking it. The body's taking it pretty well and adapting.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
I think it will be interesting to hear how you go Queen's birthday. You have to report back next month, but let's wrap it up there for now, eh?
Cool. See you, Tom.
Nice one. Catch you later.
If you liked the show, please support it by sharing this podcast with one person who would benefit from it. The best place to find more content like this is at genebeveridge.nz, where you can find years of training blogs, race reports, podcasts, and coaching videos. If you don't want to miss future episodes, I recommend subscribing to my newsletter by visiting genebeveridge.nz or by following on social media, Perfect Flow on Facebook and Gene Beveridge on Instagram. For Q&A, send messages to nav@perfectflow.nz.